This is the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. This is a show about ideas, people, and behaviors that are considered inappropriate, out of bounds, or beyond the pale. The things you're not supposed to talk about if you're a school teacher, a college professor, a businessman, a politician, a parent, a neighbor, or even a podcast host. These are the things you're not supposed to say or even think if you're a good liberal, a good conservative, or a good citizen. Each week, I'll interview a person who has something bad to say. They might be a journalist or a professor. They might be a porn star or a drug dealer. They might just be an ordinary person with an ordinary job who doesn't care about the rules of polite society. I'm not interested in breaking the rules just to be a troublemaker. I'm interested in people who break the rules of conventional thought and to expand the scope of what is possible to say in our society. I'm interested in people who make me think. Many people insist that history effectively began on October 7th and that the events of that day should be judged accordingly. But it is simply impossible to understand why innocent civilians were shot to death or taken hostage on that day, or why now there are hundreds of children lying under rubble in Gaza, without understanding the history of a place that not very long ago was called Palestine. This is my interview with the historian Zach Foster. I am joined from Mexico City by Zachary Foster, who is a historian who I recently became aware of because he is a historian of Palestine, of all things, something you're really not supposed to do in certain ways, I think. But and I also found you, Zach, in my research into and discovery of Jewish anti-Zionists, which I am finding is an extremely rich tradition, I guess I would say. It is definitely a tradition, and it's about 100 years old, in fact, at least. But yeah, and you're one of those. And you've also you visited Gaza and the West Bank and Israel many, many times. So I wanted to ask you, first of all, how did you get there? Right. And so let's do the background, who you are, where you come from, why on earth you chose this path in life, which doesn't get you anywhere. I don't know if you're aware of that, but being pro-Palestinian, especially as a Jew, is not the best career move. So you're from the Midwest, right?
That's right. Yeah, I grew up in a suburb of Detroit.
Right. And we talked before we record. I won't say where, but I know it well. I spent a lot of time in your hometown. And your family is Jewish, but also I take it they were and are still Zionist?
Yes, that's correct. I would say every single member of my family, except for myself, is Zionist and Jewish. And yes, that's correct.
Wow. And so what was that? I mean, to what extent when you were growing up, was that a part of your life and a part of what you were taught?
Look, I went to Jewish schools growing up, Jewish summer camps, Jewish youth groups. Also, I went to Zionist summer camps, Zionist youth groups, and Zionist schools, right? They were all Zionists. They were also all Jewish. So yeah, I was very much raised to believe Israel is my homeland, to celebrate Israel's Independence Day the same way I would celebrate Hanukkah or Passover, to raise and wave the Israeli flag just as I would the American flag. If anything, I would say that I became more curious and more interested and more loyal and more passionate about the state of Israel than I did about the United States. And so spent a semester in Jerusalem as an undergrad at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, traveled to the Balkans with a group of half American Jews and half American Palestinians. And I think that was one of the first turning points for me to get back to the question around, how did I wind up being a Jewish anti-Zionist? Mm-hmm. Here we are in these dialogues, hours and hours at a time, crying, screaming, sharing stories, talking politics. And there's just one thing that kept coming up in those dialogues. And the Palestinian Americans kept kept confronting us with the same question, which was, why is it that you, as American Jews, who may have never been to Israel, may not have any Israeli relatives, may have no connection, no knowledge of the country whatsoever, you have a right to go claim citizenship in Israel, Palestine. Whereas us, Palestinians, whose parents and grandparents are from there and were born there, we do not have that right. Why is that? And I think the answer is like, I don't have a good answer. You're absolutely right. Like, you should have the right. Like, you should certainly have the right ahead of me. And I think that was kind of the starting point for me, and sort of the beginning of my transition from Zionist to anti-Zionist.